Video a little faster. Apologies for the sociocultural, which is taking a while for me to explain. But we've already covered in my previous videos what is culture, what are social dynamics. We've discussed conventions, norms, beliefs. One thing to be aware of that I've covered in the analytical aspect of writing videos is stakeholder analysis and the ideological apparatuses or apparati based on Louis Althusser. So this talks about the power dynamics of society, and so this would be the interaction of different members of society based on beliefs and components and structures. So go look up the video on stakeholder analysis. For that, it is a blend of how the sociocultural ties with an analytical model to help you understand better. And I also tie it to stakeholder analysis, but it breaks down the different parts of society. Althusser did call this thing power dynamics. He called hegemony, which is the negotiation of power among all the different pieces of a society, and it does help you understand how social forces can affect the way you make arguments or who gets to speak and that kind of thing. That will come into play as we talk about power dynamics. I do want to discuss this idea of authority. Now, the first part of this, don't look too much at that slide yet. We'll get there. But as we talk about authority, the first step is to brainstorm. Who are some authorities in my life, in your life, in our lives? So I usually do this in my class, and everybody gets to shout things out, and they'll say like, my mom or my parents. Okay, maybe it's the police officers. Maybe it's government. Maybe it's, I don't know, my dog, the government. Maybe more specifically what in the government. So maybe it's the president. Who else has authority over me? The person taking my order at McDonald's. All of these different things. We can brainstorm a list. Maybe it's my wife, my spouse, my partner. Maybe it's my kids. How do they have authority over me, Will? That's confusing. I don't understand. And so we come up with this long list. We usually get to 20 or 30 items before I call it, but it's a lot easier to do when there are 20 or 30 people in the room, or 15 at least, in the room brainstorming. So as we look at these different things, do they all have the same types of authority in our lives? That's really the question. As we discuss power dynamics, who affects me as a writer or as a person? Who affects my readers or as people? We want the sociocultural aspect of writing helps us pull apart that sense of the power dynamics behind what's being written and why. If you've ever wondered why your message isn't being received how you thought it was, it could be linked to someone's beliefs. It could be linked to authorities in their lives. So let's dig in more into this. So as we look at these different categories, we may also include things like our bosses, our supervisors, that sort of thing. But we want to think about who gets authority, who is an authority in our life, and how can we categorize these. Do I see my mom at the same as the same type of authority as the president? Do I see my wife in the same role as my kids or my dog? Do they get the same amount of authority, or do they affect my decision-making power or what I do or my actions in the same way? These are things we want to ask as we think about authority. And so to make this video quicker hopefully than past videos, let's talk about there are probably better ways of describing this, but this is how I think about it. If you know of better terminology, or if you know of research that speaks to these, I hope my sociologists who see this might, do a brother solid and send that to me. So with that, let's talk about different types of authority. We have established authorities. These are those permanent authorities. It's really hard for you as an individual to change who the established authorities are by yourself. And so that's something you want to be aware of. Established authorities, as you're a kid growing up, maybe an established authority is the principal of your school. Maybe an established authority is someone with authority that goes beyond just you, authority that's been anchored or that's been established in a document, a contract, a law. So when we look at, for instance, police officers, or when we look at senators, or when we look at the president, or judges, each of those have established authority. It's established for a longer period of time. And so in some cases, you may be able to make a case in a moment for senators or representatives or the president because they've got 2, 4, 6 years, whatever the case is, before they get reelected. You may make a case as temporary authorities. But established authorities usually are more permanent, are harder to get out of the role that they're in over you as an individual, and they usually have a long-term power, ability to enact authority in your lives. Your parents are established authorities in your lives as long as they haven't done anything particularly stupid until you're 18, at least legally. So the average parent stays or has the ability to enact authority over their kids up until 18, unless something weird happened. Unless something really weird happened and the law had to come in and Child Protective Services or something like that. Those sad situations. Not the point. An established authority is long-term and is more permanent. It's hard to change, so it's hard to get new people in that role. Police officers often are like this. It's a lot harder for them to lose their job. Judges are like this. It's a lot once they're elected. It's a lifetime. Once they're appointed, it's a lifetime appointment. Or as last I checked, there may be different levels of that. So if you're a law scholar, let me know. But those are permanent authorities. These are people who they have authority because of the role they play. So this is where we get sayings like respect the badge or respect the position even if you don't respect the person, that kind of thing. And so we'll often see that mentioned in conversations about politics and whether it's a president or a politician that you're not a fan of or someone else isn't a fan of. We might say, well, we respect the office even if we don't respect the person. And so they're in a role. Their role in and of itself is an established authority where they can do certain things, whether you like it or not. Temporary authorities are still official authorities, but they are limited, either limited by geography or by time or by your ability to leave the situation. So a temporary authority might be your boss at work. They have authority over you when you're clocked in, when you're on the premises. They can tell you to do certain things within certain parameters as an employee, but you can also choose to leave that place. And so they have official authority no matter what. Within certain guidelines as a manager or a supervisor of that property that you can't change without some crazy process. But what you can do is step out from under their authority by leaving the physical environment or by telling them you quit your job or something like that. So that would be a temporary authority. It might be the same as, so for me, when I have a class that's 8 weeks or 16 weeks long, I have certain things I'm allowed to do in my classroom however I like in certain instances. I get to choose kind of my grade scale. I get to choose how things are graded, what deadlines are there, what consequences or rewards I give to people who do what they're supposed to do or don't do what they're not supposed to do. But it's only for a certain time and only within certain parameters. I can't tell people what to do when they get home because I'm a professor, I can't tell them they have to go do this thing or force them to take their dog on a walk or force them to go get gas in their car. I can't do that with the authority I have. My authority is limited and temporary within a certain period of time and within a certain context. So in that case, that makes me a temporary authority that's still official. So we want to think about that in comparison to some of the permanent authority. And then we have allowed or relinquished or personal level authority. This is something where no one gives someone, no one has this the allowed or relinquished authority in writing. That would change the type of authority. But what happens is it's the kind of thing that sometimes people call influence. And so the allowed or relinquished authority is where I say there's something about the relationship I and this other person have where I have given them the ability to speak into my life. I've chosen to listen to this person on this subject, or I've chosen to submit myself under this person and take their leadership or take their authority or give them authority by allowing them to tell me what to do. So this is personal submission to someone else, or personal listening, choosing to let someone speak into your life. So when done really well, this is how you get grassroots movements going. No one officially told this person they were the leader. No one said anyone else had to listen to them. But they're so compelling either because of their character or because of their logical ability to make an argument, or just they compel you by sheer force of personality to listen to them. And so you do. That would be a relinquished. I've allowed them authority in my life. I've relinquished authority in my life so that when they tell me to do something, I do it. Even if it's something I don't want to do, I've allowed them authority in my life. So it could be in a grassroots movement. It could be in the home. It could be that I give my wife or my wife certain authority over me. She gives me certain authority over her because we're a team and we're back and forth. So there are times, if she wants to have Taco Bell for dinner, which actually isn't true, if she wants to have Olive Garden for dinner, then I would, even if I wasn't feeling like Olive Garden, I might say, okay, because that's what she wants. On people's birthdays, we give them relinquished authority sometimes. My 6-year-old my youngest daughter just turned 6 this year, so just yesterday. At the recording of this video, and so she got to control certain things that we all did as a family. We gave her authority about who went on certain trips, or who drove out to the store, or who got to go on a daddy-daughter donut date, or what we had for lunch. So we relinquished authority to her and allowed her to be the boss in that instance. This can be really healthy if you have criteria that, and if the person you allow authority over you has the character to support their ability to lead, or wisdom enough to lead well. It's also the way that some people get into when these balances aren't done well. This is where we also see dependent relationships and abusive relationships, because someone's been given more authority in their life than they should. Someone has taken on a different role, and so you can relinquish authority. But if someone tries to take on authority, or try and pretend that they're an established authority in your life when it should be relinquished, where you should be using some sort of discernment, that is at this allowed or relinquished level. So, for instance, again, my role at the campus. As a professor, I might be considered an established authority generally because I'm a permanent full-time position faculty member at Chandler Gilbert. There are certain things, if I see them happening on campus, I'm allowed to say something or do something within reason, within parameters set by the school. In my classroom, I'm a temporary authority for the students in that classroom, enrolled in that class, and they can choose to leave my class and withdraw or stay in. But when they're in, they are they're submitting under the school's establishing of my authority and ability to grades and all that fun stuff. And there are processes and checks and balances for temporary and established authorities. And then hopefully, even in everyday life, maybe my students decide that I'm someone worth listening to. They're not just in my class to get a grade, so they don't just do the work because it's what gets them the grade and treat me like a temporary authority, but they start thinking that I'm someone worth listening to, and they allow me to speak into their lives. That's kind of what I hope to earn the right to do. It's something we have to earn the right to speak into other people's lives, even if it's in everyday stuff, even if it's what I teach. So students can choose not to learn from me when it comes to writing. Students can see me as just another way to get a grade, or they can say, okay, for whatever reason, I feel compelled to listen to him and do what he says when it comes to writing and rhetoric and whatever. So then they've relinquished authority and said, I want to learn this. I don't just want to grade. And that's the shift in authority. So I can actually, depending on how people interact with me and where they interact with me even just in my role as a professor, someone may treat me with the established authority I have just on campus. They may treat me as a temporary authority in my classroom, or they may, as a person, decide I'm worth listening to and believe what I have to say about any subject, any particular subject. They feel like they can do that. And then they've relinquished authority in some ways and said, I'm trustworthy enough to listen to. So that's kind of how these levels of authority work. So as we look at that, what we're doing when we allow authority, if you want to sound cool in a sociology class or a psychology class or humanities-based classes, we are enacting agency. We are enacting our individual decision-making power to make a choice about who we obey or don't obey and why. And the best obedience comes because you love someone or care about someone. There's an ancient saying, there's a... one of the greatest teachers of all time said, if you love me, you'll obey me. That there was something about his character, something about who he was that said, okay, the things I am telling you are worth listening to. And if you're saying you love me, you'll do what I say, because that's one way you show trust. Now, if the wrong person says that, it can be really dangerous. So you always have to check. You always have to consider credibility when you're considering authority. And also be aware that people who don't have character can still end up as temporary authorities or established authorities for one reason or another. People can be in positions of authority and power who don't have the character to lead well, who don't have the wisdom to lead well. And yet there are certain points, certain times when they are considered authorities over us. And so that can be a really challenging, tension-filled situation. And it's something that we have to kind of work out individually with each individual level of authority. So keep this in mind and think of how this might change the way you write. What kind of authority are you drawing on? Whose authority are you borrowing to make your claims? That's why scholarly sources are cooler than Wikipedia, because scholarly sources have an established or a more established authority. What kind of authorities matter to your readers? Who have they allowed as an authority, whether they're trustworthy or not? There are some people who socioculturally have chosen to accept or not accept certain news outlets. There are people who are like, if it's from CNN, it's wrong. If it's from Fox News, it's wrong. And they'll that's not an authority in their lives. Conversely, there are people who are just the opposite. If it's from CNN, it has to be right. If it's from Fox, it has to be right. And so they have trusted authorities in their minds, people they've allowed to be authorities in their lives, even if they don't have, they don't act as temporary or established authorities. So that being said, as writers, we want to consider who our readers perceive as authorities, not just who we perceive as authorities in our lives. So there's just a general practice that can be beneficial. It can change the way we think about the people in our lives by looking at these different types of authority. But as writers and as readers, we want to think about these things too. It makes us more aware of our audience, and it helps us pick better sources, pick better support, make our argument more effectively by drawing on the sources or the authorities that our readers will agree with, not just that we will agree with. So, unless we can make a case for that somehow, and that ties to that appeal to ethos. People can have credibility for good reasons or for bad reasons. But as readers and writers, we want to be discerning. We want to pull apart that, think about it, chew on it. That's what I have for you.